Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erik Bush. I'm the CEO of Demand Driven Technologies and delighted to be your host for today's webinar. Our topic for the day is taking wholesale distribution to a whole new level in NetSuite. Before we get started, I just want to share a couple comments about the webinar environment for us as we get started here. First of all, as we typically have large attendance on these webinars, we keep everyone on listen-only mode. That helps ensure the audio quality for all attendees. But that doesn't mean that we're not interested in your questions. So if you do have questions, please use the question feature in your webinar control panel. You can just go down in there, type in your questions as we go through the presentations, and we'll answer those out at the end of the session and ensure we cover off any questions that do come up. Finally, the webinar is being recorded, and we will distribute not only the presentations from the webinar today, but as well a link to the recording so that if you want to review it again, you'll have the opportunity to do that. And as well, if you want to share that link with other members of your company or other colleagues that you think might be interested, we'd appreciate that. And you can do that and they'll be able to see the webinar content. So with that, let's just talk about our agenda for the day. We're delighted to have Howard Coleman with us of MCA Associates. Howard is very deep in the wholesale distribution space, has worked there his entire career, both within companies operating in that arena as well as a consulting and advisor to companies around the country on the whole issue of wholesale distribution and getting better supply chain performance. He's going to talk about kind of the future of supply chain management in that dimension, wholesale distribution, and I think you'll find his remarks very insightful. We'll then follow up with a brief overview of basics of demand-driven MRP or DRP. This is a concept that's been out in the market the last 8 years or thereabouts, and has really started to take root globally as the new planning method that most people are going to be following. And I think you'll find those insights very useful to your environment and kind of help understand kind of where you can get supply chain improvements in your environment. Brad Mitchler off our team here at DD Tech will be giving you a demonstration of Replenishment Plus. We have a version that runs native in NetSuite, and I think you'll find that pretty interesting in terms of how it embeds into your NetSuite environment. As well, Brad will give you a brief overview on some analysis that we provide to every client that's interested to get a better understanding of how the solution will work in their environment. And certainly, again, we'll take any questions and answer those at the end of the session. So please, again, use that webinar control panel to be able to ask any questions that you have as we go through. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Howard, who will take you through his presentation. Howard?
Thank you very much, Erik, and particularly for the opportunity to participate in today's webinar. You know, this particular topic has really fascinated me for some time now, both as a former supply chain manager or a practitioner, and over several years as a consultant. I've seen a real need for a solution that transforms the current thinking, the prevailing conventional wisdom, if you will, that exists, and which I find is often embedded in the enterprise software that many wholesale distributors possess and utilize each and every day. So I'm particularly supportive of any time we can think differently about this, and which might be able to foster a completely different perspective in terms of wholesale distribution, inventory, and supply chain management. Now, having said that, I really believe there is a strategic race for supply chain excellence going on. It's going on right now, and it's being used as a competitive weapon by many companies. The art and the science of supply chain management has matured fairly rapidly, although I would suggest a bit slower in the wholesale distribution area. But the timelines for adoption that I see now are being accelerated. That is, there seems to be less patience with just incremental improvement. In my view, therefore, you should be aware of and understand as much as you can about some of these specifics that speak to this topic, and particularly listening closely to what the folks at Demand Driven Technology have to say today. So before the folks from demand-driven technologies begin addressing some of their real meat on the bone, I'd like to address this topic within the context of the traditional wholesale distributor, product inventory ordering, and the intercompany inventory planning and replenishment schemes that are being employed, and touch upon some of the key challenges and, yes, some of the pain points that I've routinely observed in my own particular practice, and to which demand-driven technologies seems to possess some very interesting solution methodology. Sales or demand forecasts tend to drive our supply chain management and inventory replenishment rationale, don't they? These forecasts drive the replenishment controls we have in place, and they become mitigated by things like lead times and safety stock parameters, reorder quantity parameters, and other types of rules. In other words, they become the inventory drivers, and often are very much relied on and maybe even over-relied on. We all know forecasts are subject to variance, particularly at the stock keeping unit level, the SKU level, and I suspect that many of us may have learned that, frankly, the hard way. So we experience, as a result, high inventory levels, low inventory turns, less than desirable service levels, product at the wrong location, what we might conclude are faulty stocking strategies. These issues have not only have an impact on the wholesale distributor, but also on their vendors. And I might even suggest even the marketing and buying groups that they might be associated with. Now, this last one may be a bit surprising to you, and I expect demand-driven technologies will be addressing some of this today also, because over the years, there's been so much discussion about wholesale how wholesale distributors can collaborate with their suppliers and vice versa, going beyond the typical transactional nature of the business of buying and selling. But somehow the discussion, as much of it as there is, and as I've tracked it and perceived it, always seems to end up reverting back to the middle, one of really disconnected silos. It reverts back to one of the discussion of price and or rebates, and even again involves the vendors and the specific marketing groups involved. I know from my own experience working in many different verticals, there are some wholesale distributors that are able to furnish point of sale or order demand info to their suppliers. They do it in real time. And by the way, they even get paid for it. That's kind of a win-win, I suggest, on both sides, as opposed to each attempting to optimize their own local demand planning. So we should be trying, in my estimation, to find ways to provide anticipated buy signals, providing greater visibility to our supply chain partners, and further developing the approach to a collaboration. In other words, really building those relationships. In today's webinar, you're going to hear two simple words, push, and you're going to hear about pull. Push, really, simply defined, is replenishing product to our DCs in our warehouses, primarily based on forecasts. It's what we do. Pull is different. It uses a different approach, one that replenishes product based on something that is more clearly approximates actual demand, what's really happening as opposed to the forecast. So I would suggest you put a pin in this one, as it should become much clearer to you as we move along today. In fact, you may want to keep this picture also in your mind's eye. Put a pin in this one too, because we're employing some different thinking here. Pull, which I suggested, was reacting to current demand, versus push, which relies heavily on forecast, always seems to raise some mind-bending questions and challenges to the conventional wisdom in inventory and supply chain management, and sometimes, as I've observed, sometimes to the point of chronic conflict. This is why I believe this picture is so valuable. It really is truly worth 1,000 words. Now, on the right side, on the pull side, you'll see that the inventory peaks are lower, the inventory lows are a bit higher, and the period, that is the time between replenishment cycles, is shorter. So pull has shorter periods between replenishment cycles. Push has longer periods between replenishment cycles. With push, I suggest there's more opportunity for stockouts because the replenishment cycle is longer. The cycle then is more vulnerable to forecast variance. With pull, there's less opportunity for stockouts because of the shorter periods between replenishment cycles. In other words, we have an opportunity to react more quickly to forecast variances when it surely turns up. So push typically results in higher average inventory levels. Pull, I would suggest, typically results in lower average inventory levels. Now, if you happen to have a distribution network that looks something like this, distribution center, some branch, store locations, it's a hub and spoke arrangement as your primary distribution network. Then your objective should be to minimize the total inventory across the whole entire distribution network, but still be able to meet your desired service levels to end customers from each location. Now, I know that's a mouthful, and frankly, I know it's all not that easy to do sometimes, because here's what happens. So look at this hub and spoke arrangement. It's really different silos. So I think this maybe introduces some real facts of life for us to consider. And I think today is a good opportunity for us to challenge them. Now, if we refer to this slide, the forecast number, which is the number to the left of the slash, and the actual demand, which is the number to the right of the slash, shows that there's significant variance at each spoke. Although, if you look at the distribution center level, where the forecast is aggregated, the variance is a lot more acceptable. Surely a much messier situation at the branch or spoke level. So I would ask you to consider this statement. The narrower the aggregation, the worse the answer becomes. Let me say it again. The narrower the aggregation, the worse the answer becomes. In other words, the question of how much you will consume of a product, for instance, from the distribution center, will typically provide a better answer to the question, how much product will you sell from one of those spokes? It's an absolute fact. Why? Because it's a statistical truth. In practice, you may tend to address this truth by overcompensating with inventory, particularly at the spoke. And that's just where the forecast variance is the highest. The variance compensation is usually accomplished with safety stock and, of course, a lot of risk. And, of course, from a service level perspective, there may also be a misallocation of inventory that results in inventory at the wrong place or inventory at the wrong time. So there is a tendency to push inventory through our supply chain based on a specific method you use to calculate forecast and the way you use your inventory drivers. Demand variability is often not recognized quickly or even communicated to the source of supply being the distribution center or the vendor. So all the players in the supply chain are often challenged by a whipsaw effect that might look something like this. Well, we are constantly reacting throughout the supply chain because of this tendency to push inventory throughout the supply chain based on just forecasts. Demand variability immediately occurs, it takes over, it's not recognized quickly or even communicated to that source of supply. Again, that's why we get this whipsaw effect. I think there are good reasons for suppliers to think differently also, beyond their own local optimization issues. So what if you could apply these same pull principles, this pull thinking, with your suppliers so that they are producing what their customer, that means you, need rather than anticipating, in other words, forecasting what they think you'll need, and then have a better control over their own production and supply capacity too. I think there is a real opportunity to get suppliers to think differently, which might lead to more frequent resupply to the whole supply chain, increasing the velocity of the product throughout the supply chain, reducing their forecast variation also, and maybe even reducing their lead times. I believe this new collaboration approach should begin around the discussion of continuous flow. and how we become more synchronous in the way we do business with one another. Sharing buy signals with your suppliers, fostering the opportunity to share data, the possibility of what I might call a direct data connection, very simply, with suppliers to communicate these buy signals, I think is pretty intriguing, because there now could be real aligned interest, and that could be a positive development in a real form of collaboration. So I think this picture kind of sums it up. It's what I, simply call the systems logic. And for me, it says, and I hope for you, it says it all in terms of what the stakes are in attending to supply chain management, its impact on cash, inventory cost, and customer service strategy. It emphasizes the challenges and the pain points I described earlier, and as will be further described as we go along today. Your customer service policies, to a large extent, drive your inventory levels, and they in turn lead to specific operations, sourcing, buying, and replenishment strategies to support it all. Again, all these have to do with those challenges and pain points we described earlier. So I would suggest that the bottom line here really is that this drives us, or should drive us, to be looking at our supply chain network in terms of total cost of inventory and the total cost of distribution. Erik?
Howard, thanks so much for your remarks. Greatly appreciate your insights, and they really are right on the mark in terms of what we're seeing out in the industry as well. So with that, let's take a look at a little bit of an overview on some DDMRP or DRP basics. And this is an important dimension of what we do. Demand-driven MRP was introduced into the market in 2011 and has really taken root. It was the culmination of about a decade's worth of work by the founders of the Demand-Driven Institute, and really fusing conventional planning techniques like MRP and DRP with pull-based tactics of lean and theory of constraints and the like. And it's really at the foundation of everything we're doing here at DD Tech, because our whole belief is that if we can learn to be more adaptive and flexible and agile in terms of responding to true market demand, we can end up with clients in a much better position in terms of serving their customers, achieving very high fill rates, and at the same time reducing inventories and compressing lead times. So our business is really founded on the principle that we're going to deliver tangible and sustainable results for our clients. We've seen over and over again where companies have deployed all the well-known ERP systems only to find that their key supply chain metrics really didn't improve at all as a result of that. And our mission statement is all about doing something completely different than that and delivering tangible and sustainable results. We have 3 product offerings that we provide to the market. Our primary product offering is a solution called Replenishment Plus, which is the world's most widely deployed DDMRP solution. We have over 80 implementations across 6 continents of that software. Along the way, we built a version of it that runs native in the NetSuite environment, and Brad will show you a demonstration of that and how well embedded it is running inside your NetSuite cloud, fully integrated with all the other functionality that you know and love in your NetSuite environment. We also have a finite scheduling solution in case there's any manufacturers out there that really helps do a better job of aligning your production schedules to where the true demands are. And there's nice handshakes between that and the replenishment offering. DBR is not yet in the NetSuite environment. We do plan to build a version of it to run in NetSuite, but that's not a product that's yet available. So again, it's all about tangible and sustainable results. On-time fill rates, complete order fill rates in the 97 to 100% range, and while at the same time reducing lead time and seeing substantial reductions in inventory between typically 30 to 45% in that range. Sometimes the achievement rate is a little bit on the lower end, but typically that's in clients that are growing at a faster rate, so they're inherently going to need some amount of incremental inventory to achieve the service levels that they're trying to target. But these are compelling results, and they're been demonstrated in a wide range of industry segments. This gives you a view of just some of our clients around the world. You can see we've been successful in automotive, consumer goods, industrial, aerospace, packaging, healthcare, even hospital supplies, things like that. So there are countless examples of success of the methodology in our software in those environments, as well as even in the distribution dimensions of those companies as well. And so how do we get there? What's really different about this than what you would conventionally find? Well, if you're a user of any of the major ERPs, you're basically using the MRP logic that was developed back in the early 70s. It's forecast driven. If I know and have a good forecast, then it'll predict what I need to order and have it manufactured or purchased by a certain given point in time to meet the demand I'm expecting in the market. And, as we find over time now, since the 70s, we see more product proliferation, more SKUs to manage. We see companies sourcing over longer lead times to try to get a cost advantage out of that. So by forecasting more items over a longer horizon, we inevitably end up in a bad forecast, a forecast that's really not accurate at the item level, which is where it really matters. And as a result, companies end up in this bimodal distribution where I've got too much of the wrong stuff, not enough of the right. Companies have been surveyed, we've surveyed them, other consultancies have surveyed them, and we find this as a chronic condition. And in fact, if we talk about this too much with some clients, they just get a little bit frustrated with us because that's the pain point that they're trying to deal with and trying to figure out how to resolve. Predominantly, the result of all of that is that it leads to the use of spreadsheets as the primary planning tool. People don't trust the information that their MRP or DRP module is giving them, and as a result, we see a preponderance of spreadsheets out there where companies are taking data out of the system, creating their own stocking rules or reorder points or whatever parameters they're using, trying to come up with a better answer, and still being frustrated that they're not getting to the kind of achievement rates that they believe should be capable of. So the real difference is that we're going to say this. We're going to say, look, if we could adopt true sales order or consumption-based planning, we know at least one thing would get better, and that's our demand signal, right? An actual demand is much more accurate than a expectation or a forecast of what demand will be. So in principle, no one will argue with me about the idea that pacing to actual demand would be better as long as we knew we could do it. In other words, if I try to say, well, we're going to pace to actual consumption, well, companies will come back and say, we have items with 15 or 20-day lead times or longer. If we waited to get the order, we wouldn't be able to ship on time. And that's a true statement. So we have to have a vehicle then that allows us to pace to actual demand in the market. And that's what's called a DDMRP buffer. A buffer is designed for constant availability. In other words, we're committing to hold stock. And the algorithms and the tools that we use to design that buffer are really where the rubber meets the road. Because if we do this well, then we can in fact pace to actual demand in the market. And that's obviously going to be a more accurate signal. So how do we ensure that they're going to have constant availability? The zones are built as follows. The yellow zone is kind of the order processing time. So it's considered as usage over the lead time. If I have an item being consumed in the market at 10 per day and it has a 10-day lead time, then my yellow zone will be 100 units tall. If I place an order at top of yellow, which is the reorder point, the material should arrive at bottom of yellow. Now, what if that doesn't happen? What if the usage rate is higher during that lead time? What if the lead time isn't achieved? We obviously know that variation is going to be one of our most challenging dimensions to manage in a supply chain environment. So we're going to size the red zone to deal with that variation. Items that are steady runner, predictable supplies, predictable demand will have a thinner red zone. Those that are more unpredictable, have higher variation, will obviously need to add more safety coverage in there to ensure that we can protect that constant availability. If we do that well, though, that constant availability then allows us, again, to pace to actual demand in the market, which, again, we know is a more accurate demand signal. Our green zone is going to be based on our order policy, typically, a minimum order quantity or a desired order cycle, perhaps ordering every week or every 2 weeks. MOQs, to me, are the biggest area to focus on during a DDMRP implementation. Often cases, clients are signing up for excessively large MOQs in the pursuit of maybe a last point or two or three of discount from the provider. And this is a dangerous road to go down because by Signing up for larger green zones, you're inherently signing up for more stock, you're inherently signing up for a greater risk of obsolescence. And no one seems to be able to factor that into their analysis. DDMRP has one great element of it that I think is really unique and a key differentiator, and that it tells you and predicts for you what your average inventory will be. The formula for doing that is all of the red zone plus half of green. Why is that? Well, red is our protection for variation. Green is what we order on average. So if we take and add to the red zone half of the green zone, that's our average position. We're somewhere between bottom of green and top of green. That becomes our predictor of our average inventory, and you'll see Brad demonstrate this in the software. Why is that useful? Well, I can figure out from that how many pallet positions of a given item or how much shelf space I need to dedicate. I can determine my working capital from that. And it also then helps me understand, if I do sign up for large MOQs, how much extra risk am I taking in terms of driving up my expected average inventory, driving up my risk of obsolescence, and other factors like that. So we can't go into all the depth around this buffering logic, but trust that it's very robust, extremely dynamic, fitting into the changes and patterns that you find in your business, and it really allows you to do this idea of shifting to a true consumption-based planning model. The dynamic element means that the buffers are going to flex over time as demand patterns change. You can also flex them for forecasted reasons where appropriate. And we're not saying that forecasting isn't valuable. There is a role for forecasting. We just don't want it to be the primary determinant of new supply order generation. Here's just some examples of our clients around the world, the kind of improvements that they've seen in terms of better service levels, better revenue growth on lower inventories, factors such as that. So there's a lot of dimensions in here that really apply and are, universally beneficial to both manufacturers and distributors. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton now over to Brad and ask him to take you through a demonstration of Replenishment Plus for NetSuite. While we do that, I just do want to remind you to use the question feature on the webinar control panel if you do have any questions. Again, we'll be covering those off at the end of this session. Thanks. Brad?
Thank you, Eric. Okay, so really appreciate that from Howard and Eric. I think that's a great background and will lead us well into this demo. This is kind of the fun part. We get to talk about the software and how we use the methodology that Eric's outlined to really plan for our business in NetSuite. The first thing you'll notice here as I've logged in is that this is my native NetSuite account. I'm right here within a normal NetSuite environment. At the top bar here, you can see I've got Replenishment Plus, the icon installed right on the top bar. So this is a part of my native NetSuite environment. I can click on this and it'll take me to kind of an overview of what's going on today for R+. But today I'm going to kind of take you through the day in the life of a planner in our R+ NetSuite solution. As a planner, the first thing that I would do every morning when I came in generally would be good to go to the planner's workbench. This is a great high-level screen that shows you all of your items that are planned within R+ and the status of those items within their buffer priorities. I can filter on a single location. Obviously, in a distribution environment, we may have multi-locations managed here within R+, and it works very well in that manner. I can filter on myself if I'm Frank, the planner today, and that'll kind of whittle the information down to just my items at this specific location. I'll zoom in just a touch here. Every item in red or yellow, I immediately know when I'm looking at the screen that I have a recommended order against this item today. This is very useful because a lot of companies are using spreadsheets to manage this process, and they're looking at every item to see, do I need to manage, buy, or distribute this item today? And immediately when I log into my instance, R+ is telling me today I need to purchase, distribute, or make the items in red or yellow, but the items down here in green or blue, I don't even really need to dive into today because I know I have enough supply plan for them. So this is a very, very useful and time-saving feature of R+. You can see every line represents one item location specific combination. I've got my recommended order today, my net flow equation variables that help build out our reorder point. So I've got my on hand, which Eric talks about. My on order is any supply that's incoming for this. My demand that's due today or in the past, plus any qualified spikes on this. So this is, demand that I need to service with my buffer. Here is the spike component of that. And then that gives me my net flow, which in turn gives me my recommended order. Out here to the right, I've got my daily usage statistics as well as my lead time for the item. Now, if I'm a planner, I'll kind of go into the details of one of these items to show you the brain behind this operation. How do we get to these numbers, right? Every item that we manage in R Plus has one of these pages. It's called the R Plus item buffer page. Even if we're not keeping inventory or we don't have a buffer set up for an item, because we don't buffer every item, we'll still have an item buffer page, and it'll be set up as a non-buffered item, essentially treating that as a make, buy, or distribute to order product. This here is a buffered item, meaning I'm going to hold stock on this and guarantee constant availability of that material on this purchase part. You can see some high level information about the item at the top. So I've got my item name, the location that I'm currently viewing is the plant. So this is kind of my hub. The planner and the vendor, this is from native NetSuite that comes down. And then some of the settings that I have around this as far as whether it's replenished or not. Down here is really the heart of the DDMRP methodology lives in these two graphs right here. So here's the current value of my buffer zone. I've got my red zone that protects us against variability, kind of our safety zone. It's 30 pieces. I've got my yellow zone, and then I've got my green zone, which is sized based on an MOQ today. So the top of my green zone is all the way up 110. I've got my current on hand right here, and then I've got my net flow equation down here at the bottom. Again, my net flow is my on order plus my incoming supply plus my current demand. You can see that because my net flow equation visually falls below the top of the yellow zone, that means I need to reorder today. And I'm going to reorder every time back up to the top of green. And so if you look down here, I've got a recommended order of 96 today. That's, of course, 110 minus 14. And so this is how we manage reorder points and recommendations on a daily basis. If I look right here at this little blue dot, I can see that my target inventory for this item is 40. You heard Eric when he was going over DDMRP, the methodology, talk about the way that we track our target expected average on hand inventory is sort of the red zone plus half of the green zone. In this case, this is 30 plus 10 is 40. I expect that my on hand will fluctuate around this number and kind of sawtooth above and below this over time. This is very, very valuable because it allows us to project working capital, understand based on our buffer size how much inventory we expect to have on hand at any time for capacity reasons and other things of this nature. Of course, this buffer is changing every day based on changes in average daily usage. So this is not a static reorder point. Over here to the right, I have my part analytics view. This is a demo database, so this is all static data day by day. But what we'll see in a live environment is throughout our history shot here, we'll see this buffer actually flex up and down with actual demand at the marketplace. So if I have a growing business, I'll see my buffer increase over time, which means my expected average inventory will increase over time, this blue line right here. And so we'll see that we'll want to hold more inventory as demand increases. The same goes for a sunset product. We'd see kind of the opposite scenario. We'd see our buffer shrink and our inventory deteriorate, which is desirable when we have less market demand. You know, overall, this is a very powerful view. We can search different time frames here to see our buffer performance over time, but it really gives the planner a snapshot of, you know, how have my buffers been performing over the past week, month, 6 months, etc. And this allows us to make changes to the buffer settings, but also just to allow us to know when we've stocked out and if we should maybe increase our red zone size, things of this nature. So very powerful. Down here at the bottom of this page, I've got some more statistical type information around this item buffer. I've got my average daily usage here. So this tells me how this really helps me size my buffer based on the average daily usage that we pick up in our NetSuite environment. So this pulls all of the demand against this item location combination, divides it by a horizon that's defined on our settings page, and we say, yep, this is the average that we use per day, and that's how we build out our buffer along with some other statistics. I can see the lead times down here. This is a purchase part, so the lead time is equal to our R plus lead time. Our R plus lead time has to do with the decoupled lead time. So it's our make lead time for make items plus the longest unbuffered component underneath that in the bill of materials. Not as relevant necessarily in a distribution environment, and that's why these guys match here, because this is a purchase part. So this is just our supplier lead time. I do have order minimum, order maximum, and order multiple down here at the bottom. R Plus respects all of these sort of constraints every time it recommends a reorder, so that if you have a pallet that you need to fill, or a batch quantity for manufacturing, or maybe a maximum truck size, R Plus would only recommend orders that fit within these parameters here, which is very useful. And then I've got some alert criteria down here, which I'll go over in just a bit. Here you can see restated our recommended order today and our target inventory level. So again, just a really good overview of an item's position, and we can see our supply and demand and how it's impacting our buffers on this page. If I flip over to my part activity screen, this is also very useful, more traditional time frame availability view, what I would say. So I've got my inventory on the top line. This is always my current inventory as of today at this location. I've got any sales orders or purchase orders in this case, so any supply or demand against this item listed here below my inventory. It's sorted by date, and I can kind of see a running balance through time, so I can see when I'll be short in the future if I don't expedite and things of this nature. All supply is always counted in the net flow, so all supply is always blue. For demand here, anything in red is being counted in the net flow today. The red items are current or past due demand, plus any qualified spikes. So you can see this order here is on 9/17. This is a sales order, and it's an order for 24 units. We judge, we usually use half of the red zone as our spike threshold, so 24 is over the size of half the red zone of 15. So we're qualifying this as a spike and including it in our net flow a bit early, so we kind of are prepared for this order to ship on time. One of the great things about this being in native NetSuite is that all of the links that you'll see on this page, both here and up top, are actually links into the native NetSuite environment. So if I click on a sales order or a purchase order, or any type of supply and demand, whether it's work order or transfer orders for distribution, I can actually click those links and it will bring me into the native NetSuite screens for these items. This is very useful if you're a planner. You're able to go and research, maybe if a PO is late or a transfer order needs to be closed, things of this nature. And it just allows us to very quickly go back and forth between native NetSuite and the R Plus screens. You can see this is outside of R Plus now, and I can see the detail behind this PO, and in this case, in this sales order. We'll get out of that. Moving right along here, we have a bill of materials view, which I'll show you in just a minute. This is, again, a purchase item, so I'm not showing it here. But at a high level, now if I'm a planner and I come in, I agree with the recommended order quantity, it's very simple to execute this order. I can simply press the create purchase order button in this case, and it will take me again to the native NetSuite create purchase order functionality, where everything will be pre-populated in my live instance, and I can simply hit save to create the purchase order. NetSuite's moving a bit slow today, but we'll just let this load. So again, everything's filled out with the recommended quantity down here. All the location and dates are filled out based on the lead time. I press save and I'm done planning for this item today. By the same token, if I want to replenish this item, maybe if this is a spoke in a hub and spoke model, I could create a transfer order to replenish this the same amount as well, and it would be very similar functionality. Now, of course, on a day-to-day basis, each planner may be handling hundreds or maybe thousands of items, so it's not realistic for a planner to come into all of these items. So maybe they only go into the items that are critical on my planner's workbench, so the dark red here, and really explore why we've gotten into the inventory position that we're in. But in general, a planner would go to our Replenishment Plus tab. They would go to Planning, Accept Recommended Orders, and this is going to give us a list of every order that R Plus is recommending at this time. So anything in red or yellow on my planner's workbench will be listed on the screen, ready for me to execute. You can see that I can go ahead and just click the create button here, and it will fill out the appropriate order quantity based on my R Plus recommendation. I can see some statistics about the items, such as lead time, the min, max, and multiples. I can see what buy type it is. You can see I've got some distributed parts down here. I can change the replenish from location. So if I need to change, hey, instead of coming from my hub, I'm going to take from another spoke, I could change this replenish from location here in our distribution environment. For purchase parts, I can change the vendor if I'm dual sourcing a product, etc. I can go ahead and click Mark All. Everything will fill out, and I press Save. And that would actually go ahead and approve all the recommended orders for me today. So it's very useful in that manner. I'll go ahead and approve 4 orders for ABC exports here, just as an example. I've got my consolidate same vendor purchase orders field checked, which means all of these are going to go on one PO since they're from one vendor. And there we go. And what this is going to do is actually going to go create these orders in mass. And so again, just a big time saver from a planner standpoint. If we can trust the system, and once we're deep into an implementation and we've really got our settings dialed in, we understand the DDMRP methodology as Erik outlined, we'll be able to create purchase orders in mass based on the R+ recommendations every day. This screen shows me my successful created purchase order. I can click on this, and again, it will load the native NetSuite purchase order screen. I can see the items that I've just purchased down here. Do want to go ahead and show just quickly a bill of material view. It may be appropriate for some distributors, you know, when we talk about kitting or putting together some small bombs. It's this is a different part. It's a make part, so it's a finished product A. Very similar. It's got a different buffer profile. We also have a recommended order against this today. I can see my history again is static because of my demo data. But now if I click over to the bill of materials view, this will expand and you'll see the full bill of materials that I take from my native NetSuite item master against this item. So FPA is my top level item. Then I've got PPA as level 1 item below it. Any item that you have that has this icon next to it means that we're buffering this item. And so we're committed to holding inventory or constant availability of inventory for every item that has this icon. Any item that's grayed out means that it's a buy, make, or distribute to order part. So we only issue a reorder when we have actual demand against this within the lead time horizon. In this case, PPA is unbuffered. It has a 25-day lead time. So my FPA lead time is just my make lead time of 10 days for FPA, plus the time it takes me to get PPA on hand, which is 25 days for a total of 35 days. I can see the on-hand quantity of each of my subcomponents for this. So again, just a very useful view if you're in a kitting or manufacturing environment, being able to see visually, where you've buffered, where you've chosen to buffer, and the status and on hand of all the components. If I go back over to my workbench here, I will just go ahead and filter on one part, FPA, the part that we were just looking at. This will actually show me the status of FPA at all of my locations. So you can see I've got my plant, in this case in our demo environment where FPA is made, and then my 3 regions that I distribute to and sell from listed down below. You can see one of my regions is over the top of green, so I'm holding too much stock here. And my other 2 regions are in the yellow zone as well as my plant, so I need to replenish all 3 of these. I can go ahead and click on view for region 2 here. It'll pop me in again a very similar screen. I'm holding a buffer here. This is my region 2 FPA status. My net flow is 24, which is below my top of yellow. And so I'm going to trigger a reorder back up to the top of green. In this case, because I'm getting FPA from the plant in a distributed environment, I can actually go down and see the lead time. The lead time's 10 days. To replenish this, I would actually go to create transfer order, and it would create a transfer order from the plant to region 2 of FPA. It would take 10 days. I can change my replenish from location up here, and this is kind of how R+ and DDMRP works in this distribution environment. Did want to quickly go over the R+ alerts before so I've kind of moved out of the planning phase. So far, everything we've talked about is how much do I need to order? So how much additional supply do I need? And now I'm going to talk about perhaps I already have enough supply on the way, but I need the system to tell me when I have supply and demand mismatches, or I have late supply incoming for demand, things of this nature. So this is my R+ alert screen. You'll notice that it looks very similar to our planner's workbench, which I showed originally for the planning side. And this is telling me that anything in a current inventory status means that I have a stock out with demand, or a partial stock out with demand in this lower case. So this is saying, hey, I may have enough supply coming, but based on my current on-hand status of 0, I've got on order of 319. Perhaps I need to expedite or move out a demand order. So this is kind of the highest priority status. If I move down to material synchronization, this alert is more about I don't have a current stock out, but in the future, if I look down in my running balance, my part activity screen, I can see that, you know, I've got supply coming, but it's coming after the demand that I need it from. So this would trigger more of an expedite action. And this is obviously very relevant in a distribution environment when you're trying to keep your supply in front of your demand for your customers. So this is really it. I mean, you know, I'm not going to go over the reports today or the setup just because of time. There's a lot of cool, neat features that we have embedded in these that allow us to really hone in this program for a client-specific environment. But I'll kind of stop there on the demo. And I'm going to switch over now and talk about some of our simulation offerings. So obviously, the methodology is quite different than what a lot of our prospects and clients are doing today. And so it's important for us to be able to not only show a client how their items would work in our environment, but also for us to understand whether it's a good fit when we start to look at a client's data. So the way we do this is via what we call simulations. The goal of a simulation is to simply do what I just talked about. So we want to say, give us your data and we'll look at the data and be able to show you on an item level and an aggregate level whether the data is a good fit for our system and the DDMRP methodology in terms of inventory, service levels, and supply order frequency and size, things of this nature. It also allows us to do some what if analysis. So as Eric talked about earlier, you know, one of the cool unsung things about DDMRP is we can judge the impact that a lead time or an MOQ has on your inventory position. So because we have the expected average inventory calculation in my simulation, I can actually play around with different MOQ values to see how much inventory I would need to carry to satisfy my customers and have that constant availability of material based on the MOQ size. So it's very powerful from that manner. To do this, we really only need some simple data points. We need demand history over 12 months. So if you're a NetSuite user, it's very easy. We've made it very easy for NetSuite users to give us this information. We actually have in the Suite Bundler on the NetSuite inside your environment, you can go and search for Replenishment Plus Analysis and go ahead and install that, and it will spit out some two CSV files that give us the data we need to do the simulation. So it's very easy. If you're a new NetSuite user and you haven't been on NetSuite for a long time, not a year yet, and you don't have daily demand history for that long, we can also just send you the spreadsheet and kind of accomplish the same thing in that manner. We take the daily demand history over 12 months, key part information from your item master, so lead time, MOQs if you have them, current or average inventory so we can compare our results versus what you're currently doing. And then we also take the cost so we can put everything in terms of value. Once we have this data, we're able to put it in our tool, and it's going to enable us to look at some high-level statistics about your items so that as we try and build a business case and help you understand what the fit for your items in DDMRP is, it gives us an idea of what you're looking at. So we're looking at things like lead time, demand pulses, right? How often do we have orders against items throughout the year? And then also variation is a big component of DDMRP. How variable are our items? Again, we're not going to buffer every item, so we want to understand which items it would make sense to apply demand-driven buffers to. Then we would be able to look at, on a part-by-part basis, how DDMRP would behave for your items. You can see this part right here. I've got all of my demand pulses throughout the year that we collect down below, and then I've got my buffers that are different colors, and they flex up and down throughout the year with actual demand. And this is one of the great parts about DDMRP, right? Dynamic adjustments. This black line represents my on hand at the end of every day using our methodology in the software. And you can see this item actually never stocks out, although it does go quite low in the red zone here at the beginning of the year. And this is a very good looking part, right? So we look at this and it helps you understand, hey, if I ran this part in this methodology over the past year, here's what I'm looking at, here's what the results would have been. So it's very powerful in that way. Out here to the left, I can see some results about the item. I can see the current on hand that I'm carrying today, and then the scenario on hand. So how much on hand is the simulation generating for me? In this case, you see that there's a decrease of about 8 days of supply that we would recommend carrying for this specific product. I can see my turns, my service level in terms of days stocked out, as well as how many supply orders I would generate throughout the year and the average size of those supply orders. again, very powerful. Down at the bottom, I see some statistics about the item. So what's my ADU, or my average daily demand? It's about 1.28 on this guy. I've got a lead time of 10 days and some more variation statistics at the bottom. So this is very typical of a part that you would see in our simulation. This is a different part, a high variability part. So you can see when I look at my demand, it's very batched across the year. I've got these large segments with real big demand and then no demand at all for a month. So maybe it's project based or something of this nature. Again, my results are on the outside, but this just shows, you know, that the product and the methodology, it handles different types of demand patterns. And we can prove this out when we do the simulations. So it's great from that standpoint. And then lastly, this is an example of order spikes in a seasonal business. So at the beginning of the year, I've got a very little bit of amount of demand, and then again at the end of the year, almost no demand. So my buffers are quite small at this time. When I have periods of heavy demand, my buffers flex up with the market demand and then flex down again, so that my inventory, again, the goal is to align our inventory with actual market demand. And that's what you can see happening here. Some of these spikes are quite large. So I talked earlier, and I think Erik talked as well, about order spike qualification. You know, generally when we think about reordering, we're only looking at current and past due demand. But if an order is large enough, like these large spikes that you see throughout the year here, we would go ahead and include these in our net flow equation as soon as they hit our lead time horizon. So when we were 10 days out in this case, we would go ahead and include in our net flow, treating these items as a make to order, you know, spike basically. So when this order comes in, we'll go ahead and start making it, or we'll go ahead and start distributing that so that we're prepared when the actual order needs to be shipped. I think, you know, a lot of companies, they have order service level policies that they come up with, and they try and service their customers at 100%. But the reality is, most of the demands on this guy throughout the year are very small in nature and can be serviced by holding a very small amount of inventory at this location. But then when you have these large orders, if we can tell the client, hey, you know, on a large order of this magnitude, we're going to take our full 10-day lead time before we service it to you, we're able to limit the amount of inventory that we have to carry throughout the rest of the year. Because if we wanted to be able to service this all the time by holding inventory, of course our inventory position would have to be much larger. So this is the kind of thing that we talk through when we do the simulations. Again, it really helps DDMRP come to life for your environment, and we love it for that aspect. I've shown you so far what we do at the item level. We also are able to aggregate the results at a total level to show you, okay, for all the items that we simulated, or for all of your items in your whole instance of NetSuite, here would be the inventory reduction or increase, here would be the service level, things like this. So then you can really start to think about the return on investment and build a business case around this sort of implementation. So if you're interested, please contact us and we'll send you the information. It's very easy, again, to install the analysis bundle. Usually takes us just a couple days to turn it around, and then we'll meet and go over the results with you. With that, I will turn it back over to Erik.
Thanks, Brad. Great job. So thanks, everyone, again, for your participation in today's webinar. I think that Howard illustrated that there's some concepts that can really help transform a wholesale distribution environment to be much more aligned to true market demand. He's a big advocate of a pull-based strategy, and obviously that's what we're promoting here with demand-driven MRP and you know, our NetSuite Replenishment Plus solution. There's a number of factors that I think the DDMRP methodology provides for you in terms of getting a better grip on some of the decisions that you're making around minimum order quantities, around the design of your distribution network, around your service levels, and those factors that Howard pointed out in his presentation need to be considered as you really try to get your performance to the next level. I think Brad did a great job showing the nice embedded nature of our replenishment solution, how it fits into the NetSuite environment. Very good from a workflow. We've gotten phenomenal feedback both at SuiteWorld and from all the other clients that we've been working with over the ensuing months on the usability, the user interface, and, you know, a strong recognition that we're providing some functionality that NetSuite really doesn't have in their environment at the moment. The analysis bundle that Brad pointed out is easy to get to. and allows us to help you get a better understanding of the opportunity that this may represent for your organization. It also allows us to understand better the kind of challenges that you're facing. So we'd be very eager to work with you on helping with that analysis. And again, it's all about driving tangible and sustainable results. And so the good thing about doing the analysis is it gives us a better understanding of what opportunities out there, helps you understand how DDMRP and our software will work in your environment. And if that generates a positive business case, then you've got a framework to go forward against and some targets for us to chase together to get you to that proverbial next level from a performance standpoint. I don't see any questions have come in, so I think we're going to be okay to end a little bit early here today. I want to send my thanks out again to Howard for his great remarks on the presentation and Brad for his contributions. As I said earlier, we will be distributing the presentations from the webinar today out to you, along with the link to the webinar recording, which will be hosted and accessible to you. Please feel free to share that with your other colleagues. And if nothing else, wish you all the best on your demand-driven journey, and please reach out to us. We'd be delighted to get involved to help you out as you move down the road. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day. Take care now.